Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Ariana Lone. I am a studio art major in the class of 2024, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's Convocation speaker, Phil Chan. He is the co-founder of Final Bow for Yellowface and author of Final Bow for Yellowface, Dancing Between Intention and Impact. He is currently a 2021-22 visiting scholar at the APA Institute at New York University, the Manhattan School of Music's 21-22 Citizen Artist, and was just named a Next 50 Arts Leader by the Kennedy Center. He is a graduate of Carleton College and an alumnus of Ailey School. As a writer, Phil served as the executive director for FLATT Magazine and contributed to Dance Europe Magazine, Dance Magazine, Dance Business Weekly, and the Huffington Post. He served multiple years on the National Endowment for Arts panel and the Jadin Wong Award panel presented by the Asian American Arts Alliance. He serves on the International Council for the Parsons Dance Company, the advisory board of Dance Magazine, and was a 2020 New York Public Library Jerome Robbins Dance Division Research Fellow. His latest project, the Ballet of Porcelains, premiered at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in December 2021 and will tour throughout 2022. Please welcome Phil Chan to Carleton College.
Buddy, so nice to be back at Carleton, and a few classmates of mine too from the class of 2006 here too, so lovely to see everybody. It's super strange being back here at Carleton, just because I think this might be the first time I've performed at Carleton with a shirt on, not as captain of the man dance, so let's see how this goes. At Carleton, I was a SOAN major and dance. I was the college's first male dance major, and after graduating, I moved to New York City and was a dancer and did all of that stuff that Parna just told you guys about. But then really, this work in advocacy started about 6 years ago when then artistic director of New York City Ballet, Peter Martins, called me into his office. One of my very good friends, Georgina Pascogan, is the first Asian American soloist, female soloist with New York City Ballet, and she was on this diversity committee with the ballet company. And one of the things that came up was the Nutcracker, and how in the second act of the Nutcracker, you know, the little girl Marie, she goes through the Kingdom of Sweets, and there's all these different nationalities that are represented. And Peter was talking about how the company throughout the years had received literally thousands of letters from parents, from teachers, from board members, from donors saying, hey, you know, I'm not super comfortable with how the different nationalities are represented in the second act, and I'm not comfortable bringing my kids to the Nutcracker anymore. And boy, you know, if you lose kids at the Nutcracker, you know, you're in trouble. So Peter called me because not only do I know the ballet very intimately, but I also have the lived experience of being Chinese in America. And we talked about several things. We talked about the history of how Asians have been represented on the stage, so going back to political cartoons, to radio, TV, film, theater, Broadway, opera, and whose point of view were these depictions of Asians from? We also looked at the Asian American history of what was the history of Asian Americans coming to the United States, and what were the barriers that they faced, and what were the opportunities they were afforded. And thinking about the history of the Nutcracker itself and who was in the room and contributed to the ballet, Peter decided to make some changes to the ballet. He changed some of the makeup, some of the choreography, and some of the costuming. And I left that meeting with Peter, and I called Gina, and I said, you know, Gina, I think Peter Martins is going to change the Nutcracker. And in that moment, we thought, well, we could either just go back to our busy day jobs and say, like, hey, good job, New York City Ballet, for, you know, doing the right thing. But we looked around the rest of the ballet landscape and realized there were so many other companies across America who are still doing Yellowface, still doing these caricatured portrayals of Asian people. So on one hand, we're saying, diversity, equity, inclusion. We want to include you. People of color, come on in, you're invited. At the same time, we're presenting outdated portrayals of non-European people and culture, and we're trying to say, join our schools, join our board, get involved, but here's this version of your culture from 300 years ago that doesn't ring true to your experience. So those two things aren't congruent, right? And so we wanted to shift the conversation to figure out better ways to represent Asian people. And we knew that we only had to change the minds of probably about 10 to 15 gatekeepers, the top artistic directors of America, in order to start a larger movement. So we bought yellowface.org for $11. And we put up a simple pledge that says, I love ballet as an art form, and to achieve diversity amongst our artist audience, donors, students, volunteers, I'm committed to eliminating outdated and offensive stereotypes of Asians, yellowface, from our stages. And then we quietly went around to a lot of ballet companies to get them to have this conversation. And so I'm pleased to say 5 years out, pretty much every major American ballet company has signed this pledge. A lot of the big European companies are starting to grapple with this issue. The Royal Ballet, Australian Ballet, Canada's National Ballet of Canada. And the Paris Opera recently cited us in their diversity report as a contributing factor to their decision to no longer do blackface and yellowface. So this 353-year-old performing arts organization, the height of high art in France, saying, hey, we need to get this right if we want to keep surviving. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is some of my more recent research. I was a 2020 New York Public Library Fellow, and I basically spent the pandemic looking through the New York Public Library archives, and I looked at 100 different Orientalist ballets from Louis XIV to today. So ballets that take place in the exotic Middle East or fantasy China or India, and what were stories that we could only tell in those settings. So just really trying to figure out what was the fascination with this larger issue of Orientalism. But maybe let's start a little further back to think about how we start to get some of these ideas of Asianness in our public consciousness. So this gentleman here, this is Genghis Khan. When we think of diversity warriors, we think of people like me, but probably not people like Genghis Khan, but maybe we should. Genghis Khan was a brutal dictator. Some historians estimate that he killed about 40 million people, which was like 11% of the world population at the time. Brutal guy. But there were a few aspects of his military strategy that were really instrumental in creating cultural change. So this is all of the land that he conquered during his lifetime. And what he did, part of why he was so successful is when he came to conquer your town, he would break up the community. So he'd take your mom and send her somewhere, take your dad, send him a different place, and then he'd take other displaced people and move them into your town. So it was once a homogeneous society, a culture where we have family ties, where we all speak the same language, suddenly was forced to be diverse. And so no one group could rise up and organize and revolt against their conquerors. So it was a military strategy, diversity actually. And so all of this territory was conquered during his lifetime. So if you think about it, before that, all of these were little individual kingdoms, principalities, there were probably bandits in between, it wasn't really safe. Suddenly is now one unified geopolitical entity. So the ideas, religion, technology, science, medicine, philosophy, were all crossing this landmass at an unprecedented rate in human history. Genghis Khan was also fairly religiously tolerant, which is surprising actually for being such a brutal dude. So you have these ideas running around this area. So when we think about the European Renaissance, we like to think, oh, this is, the Europeans rediscovering the classical Greek and Roman history. Well, no, maybe it was getting ideas from Asia, new things, new influences coming through and changing how Europe did things. So this was really some of the early images of Asia were starting to come through in this period. So things like spices, silk, porcelain. Jesuit ministers were coming back with all sorts of fantastic ideas about what these exotic foreign cultures were like, often through a lens of Christianity. So again, we start to see this, not really seeing with clear eyes what Asia looks like. So an example of this, the figure on the left is the sort of laughing Buddha, the Buddhai, in Chinese Buddhism. And the figure on the right is called a pagode. It is a porcelain doll that was pretty popular in the 18th century. So if you were an aristocrat in Europe, you probably had a pagode in your house. It was sort of like an elf on the shelf or something like that. And you'll notice that the porcelain, it's trying to emulate this Chineseness in porcelain. And so it's a caricature of this Buddhai figure. And you'll notice that the head and the hands are detached from the body, and they're actually on springs. So when you move it, it's literally a bobblehead. So when you think about how Chineseness and Chinese people were portrayed on stage, if you were a choreographer in the 18th century, you could probably just do this, and your audience would say, oh, that's a pagod. I have one of those at home on my mantelpiece. Ah, that's a Chinese person. So that's how a lot of these ideas started trickling into the collective European experience. So Orientalism was this really exciting genre that emerged from really imagining what these other places beyond our borders could be. So my thesis with this next book that I'm working on, and also with this course that I'll be teaching in the fall, is that Orientalism has been the greatest driver of creativity and innovation in the Western performing arts and the Western imagination, right? Because like, if you don't know what those people over there look like, or how they act, or how they sing, or what they eat, you kind of have to make it up, right? So say we Europeans do the minuet and the polka and the waltz and the jig, so 2/4, 3/4, 4/4 time signatures. I don't know, those crazy Orientals over there, they probably do 5/4, add an extra beat, And then suddenly the next generation, Stravinsky, artists saying, hey, let's just make interesting time signatures as music. And then now we have Dave Brubeck, take 5, da 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 da, which Betsy Sylvester choreographed a piece to in Semaphore. It's 5/4. It's not exotic. It's just jazz. It's just music now. But at the time, it was coded as Oriental and as something new and breaking the rules. So that was one way that Orientalism has really pushed innovation in the form. So I wanted to show you a trailer from 2009. It's a clip that Houston Ballet produced. It's a preview to get you to buy a ticket to see their production of La Bayadere, which means the temple dancer. And it's sort of this Indian pastiche exotic ballet. And so what I want you guys to look at is think about what are some of the images in this trailer. This is from 2009, so this is not ancient history, right? What are some images that they're using to try and get you to buy a ticket? Say you're a person in Texas who might not know what a La Bayadere is, okay? This is one of the campiest videos. I love this video.
An exotic temple dancer, a noble warrior, and the stunning beauty who comes between them. This is La Bayadere. A colorful legend of seduction, vengeance, death, and love. Houston Ballet is pleased to stage the world premiere of Stanton Welch's The Temple Dancer in all its magnificent splendor. For tickets, call 713-227-ARTS. La Bayadere, ballet at its most exotic.
Wow, right? Okay, so what did we see there? We saw snakes, we saw some like queerness, like some sort of lesbian vibes. We got some opium, there's a lot of, jungle, he's like running through a plant store, So all of those things were signifiers to say, hey, this is not your Swan Lake, this is not your Nutcracker. This is sexy, it's wild, anything could happen, magic, crazy, right? So that was something that was really exciting for Europeans. So I want to talk about the different ways that Orientalism innovated the Western performing arts. So let's first start with people. Okay, I love this fire, it's so exotic. So this is an image of Nijinsky. He was a big star of the Ballet Russe at the turn of the 20th century. Here he is in blackface. He's representing the sort of golden slave, and this is in a ballet called Scheherazade. And so the story of Scheherazade is, and if you know the music, any music folks out there, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music. And the ballet goes that the Sultan decides to go off hunting, and his wife, the Sultana, decides to open the doors of the harem and let in the slaves, and they have an orgy, and then the Sultan returns home from the hunt, and he catches his wife, in the throes of passion, and the Sultana, instead of being apologetic, she, comes up to him and she takes his sword and she kills herself and dies at his feet, and that's Scheherazade. And so this was probably not how European people behaved, right? So this idea that these people were sort of like on the borders of what was civilized, they were sort of part savage, and anything could happen with these characters, right? Because we European people don't have orgies and kill ourselves over infidelity. But those crazy Orientals, they can do all sorts of crazy, wild things. So it was a way for us to explore different sides of the human experience in a safe way that didn't threaten how we do things in Europe, right? We're not going to give anybody ideas because, oh, no, these are just those barbarian, Orientals over there. They're not like us, right? Oh, hang on a second. We are getting an interruption here. We have a message from outer space. This convocation is being joined by aliens from the planet St. Olaf. And what I'd like everyone to do is to close your eyes for a moment and to imagine what these aliens from the planet St. Olaf look like. Okay, they're not blonde. Let's just use your imagination. So think about from an exotic alien planet. Do they have a body? Do they have eyes? What do they sound like? Really think about some details about these aliens. Right, so whatever this process of thinking about what they could be, right? Maybe your aliens are 6 feet tall and green and have, 4 eyes. That process, it's sort of rooted in something real, right? They sort of have to be in line with your idea of aliens, but it's probably pretty creative what everybody did, and probably everyone had a different image in their head of what this could be. That process you just went through was not dissimilar to what 17th, 18th, 19th century choreographers were doing when they created these fantasy Asian places, right? We see the similar dynamic continuing into the 20th century. These are 2 sketches by Yves Saint Laurent as part of his 1970 collection, Opium. Yves Saint Laurent wanted to create a collection inspired by China, but he didn't necessarily want to be informed by cultural specifics of China. Instead, he wanted to be able to create a China in his imagination. So he purposefully remained ignorant. He didn't go to China, he didn't read books on China, he didn't study, the aesthetics of it. That wasn't really necessary. It was really about his fantasy of it. And so what we see in these designs that came out are probably some of the most innovative things that he ever produced. The color combinations, the patterns, the textures, the silhouettes were neither Eastern nor Western and really revolutionary. But this way of working, this way of pushing innovation forward comes obviously at the expense of Chinese people, right? He called his line opium. It's a perfume fragrance. And if you know anything about Chinese history, you'll know that opium flooded China by Europeans in order to offset a trade balance, and it started the Opium Wars, and the Chinese actually refer to 100 years of shame following the loss of their empire due to their people getting hooked on opium. So opium really is kind of it's sort of like gifting Monica Lewinsky a beret, like not the most sensitive thing you could do, right? So Chinese people protested, and it was a big to-do about this. But again, so we're starting to see some of the challenges when you make fantasies about something that is very specific to somebody else. Orientalism also helped innovate this idea of place. So we all know this is Agrabah, right, from Disney's Aladdin. It's also the same place that 1001 Nights takes place, or Le Corsaire, or any sort of fantasy Arab destination. It takes place in this sort of Agrabah place, right? There are consequences to this, though. Right after the Twin Towers came down at 9/11, there was a poll conducted among Republican voters, and 2/3 of them agreed that it would be good to bomb Agrabah. Okay? Agrabah is a fantasy place. It doesn't exist, right? But you see the power of these imaginary fantasy places on who we are, right? It's political. We can't divorce this and just say it's just a fantasy. So Orientalism really innovated a sense of place. And if you think about what was going on in Europe when a lot of these Oriental depictions came up, Europe was a dark, gray, sooty place. There wasn't a lot of nature. It was just gross. I mean, there was feces in the street. The skies were black. But you could go to the theater and be taken away to these exotic places like China, where people lived in harmony with nature, where there was color and opulence and really just everything that wasn't outside. We still perform this to this day. Here we have the Jungle Book, where it's like people on the verge of humanity and people living in nature with nature. So it's a fantasy that is very, very strong and still part of our culture. So here's a couple images from some ballets that that I found that I thought were particularly beautiful. So, I mean, imagine if this was your set, right? Here's a ballet called Sakuntala, and you see there's sort of this Hindu god in the back. You actually have these sort of white ballerinas and these beautiful white tutus, but it's this really opulent jungle, which would have been like nothing a European audience had ever seen, and it would have just been spectacular, right? Like mind-blowing, right? Also, cultural specificity wasn't really necessary, right? So here's a second, I think it's the second act, and you see that there's these sort of hanging gardens of Babylon, there's these Indian elephants, it's sort of Chinese, Japanese, whatever, right? There's a sort of general attitude about how to perform Orientalism. But it just became this highly saturated, highly stylized, tableaus, pictures, stories. It was also a place where you could really let your fantasies go. So here's a set design for a Chinese temple, right? How many people have seen a Chinese temple? Even Googled a picture, right? Like we all know what they sort of look like. Not this, right? This looks like a European Versailles fantasy, right? But like, this is beautiful. It's crazy, but it's beautiful. So it was a way to say, hey, it's not the way we do things, but it's something else. What else could it be? It was this huge driver of new architecture, new style, new decorations, right? But that could only happen at the expense of an exotic, outside, non-European culture. Also, Orientalism lends itself really well to spectacle, right? This is the Metropolitan Opera's current production of Turandot. I mean, when that curtain goes up on the second act, it's literally a 10-story Chinese palace that they've built on stage. I mean, the only time I've ever seen my husband like wow like that was when he saw Turandot and when I proposed. Like, it was just that big, right? And of course, you can go to all these fantasy places when you have these large sets, so, China, ancient Egypt. I mean, look at all those people. This is their current production of Aida. There's literally like 200 people on stage and like elephants and like it's a whole to-do, right? You couldn't do that if the story was like, it's a German village, right? It doesn't look like that, right? You can't do that in Europe. Orientalism also innovated plots, right? New stories. You could tell stories about sex, right? You could tell stories about drugs, right? You could tell stories about rock and roll, right? So it was a way for like anything goes, to try something new, to tell new stories. But what are some of the consequences to that? So here we have this story. This Pierre Loti wrote this novel called Madame Chrysanthemum. It became a famous David Belasco play. And now one of the most popular operas performed across the world, Madame Butterfly, about a 14-year-old geisha who is married off to an American and then left. And she kills herself at the end after giving up her child. And it's a story that we've repeated over and over again because, like the performing arts, it's a repertory, so it repeats. And when you repeat something, it reinforces a certain idea, right? So what are some of the consequences? What are some other places we see this? In 2020, a company in the UK called the Northern Ballet, one of the top 5 ballet companies in the UK, produced a new ballet called Geisha. They had one performance before they were canceled by COVID. It was an all-white creative team, and the story was about 2 geishas. In the first act, one geisha gets raped, and in the second act, the other geisha gets raped. But the critics thought that the first rape was better than the second rape because it was more ceremonial as opposed to violent. Right? So this, if you gave me, an Asian choreographer, that budget to tell a new story, I would definitely not tell a double rape fantasy. Right? But it's still happening. This is 2020. Of course, there's the Mikado, right? The 3 Little Maids from School, right? There's another work that really defined Japanese-ness. The Mikado is my personal favorite Gilbert and Sullivan opera. I think it's brilliant. I think it's really funny. I think the music's the best out of all of them. It doesn't have to be done in Yellowface. It's a lack of creativity and imagination when a company or a director chooses to pretend to be Asian. There's so many other ways you could treat this work. But it's a work that was highly influential in terms of defining Asianness for a Western audience. And then finally, a story like Miss Saigon, which is a derivative of Madame Butterfly, which takes place during the Vietnam War, about a Vietnamese prostitute and American soldier. So it's like we're repeating the same story over and over again. What are some of the consequences? Well, This is a composite image of two pictures taken during Japanese internment. I spend a lot of time thinking about this period in history because I imagine what images were in the water when they took Japanese people away. If I was living in that time and somebody said, hey, you know that the Japanese family that owns the grocery store down the street, the one that your kids grew up playing together, they're dangerous. We have to put them in camps. We need to incarcerate them. And what would have made me say, yeah, maybe that's for the best, right? A lot of good people said, yeah, maybe that's for the best. So what was in the water at the time that would have convinced people that that was okay? I think about that a lot. We're in a similar place now, right? With the uptick in anti-Asian violence, associating Asian people with things like a disease or like porcelain, like we've been doing for 400 years. And then, of course, last year, this tragic shooting in Atlanta that killed 6 women. Apparently, the guy was mentally disturbed and had a sex addiction, yet he decided not to take it out on any other sex workers, but specifically targeted Asian massage parlors as an outlet for that. And I can't help but wonder, as a creative in this field, if we didn't have all of these stories about geishas and sexualized Asian women, would this be where we are today? So part of my work is helping arts organizations shift from a strictly Eurocentric way of seeing the world to a multiracial way of seeing the world. And so I want to give you an example of how we all can do that. So it's really the difference of a telescope and binocular. So everyone close one eye, cover one eye with your hand. When you cover one eye, suddenly you lose depth perception. And if you look towards your nose, you actually only have 150 degrees of range. You can't see the whole space. Now, when you remove that hand, suddenly you have depth perception. Suddenly you can see 180 degrees. You get more, right? So shifting from strictly seeing through one perspective to seeing through multiple perspectives. That's why we have two eyes that are slightly apart from each other, is to do that. So how can we apply that to, say, a work from Shakespeare, or a Puccini opera, or a Petipa ballet? Okay? One of the things that people think about, and here's two models of Eurocentric versus multiracial. So this idea that Europe is huge and everybody is sort of a peripheral culture, exotic outside, versus this, which is a little bit messier, but we get all of this. And what people sometimes are afraid of in this conversation is, well, if we make room for other people, we have to give something up. What a small way of thinking. Multiracial means more, right? We're not getting rid of Shakespeare and Puccini and Mozart and Balanchine. We're keeping those and getting everything else. Multiracial includes European history and culture. Multiracial includes white people, but it includes so many other people too. And that's really where we need to go if we want our audiences, our artists, our boards, our organizations, our art to look like who we are, who our friends and families are, who our neighbors and people in our community are. So one way of making this shift is through collaboration. Here's an image of Anna Pavlova and Uday Shankar, two dance pioneers of their time. Anna Pavlova was a very famous ballerina. Uday Shankar was a painter and then became an Indian dance artist and really was probably one of the revivers of classical Indian dance. And they collaborated. Anna Pavlova was doing all these Indian pastiche ballets and felt hollow. So she found an Indian person and said, hey, let's work together. Let's make something together, right? So I wanted to show a clip I did some interviews with two incredible artists, Sylvie Guillaume and Akram Khan, who were probably two of the leading artists of the late 20th century and early 21st century. They collaborated on a piece called Sacred Monsters. And again, this sort of South Asian man and Western ballerina. And I love this clip that Akram talks about because he talks about how we can transcend some of these labels and barriers through collaboration.
It's very, very... We talk about culture and those boundaries and those, Islamic culture or Indian culture or brown culture or Asian culture or white culture or Western culture or Eastern culture. But it's very quickly you can transcend that if you know how. And really it's about the origin of your curiosity. If it's pure, if you're truly curious, you're questioning the humanity in that person, the human narrative in that person. And you'll find that the human narrative is the same for everyone. Right? Absolutely the same for everyone. We all feel pain, we all feel love, we all feel death, loss. We all grieve. Nothing is different in that sense. So really, I was interested in the emotional body. And that Sylvie's so cool. So one of the things that I was interested in was to bring her to a threshold. That's what I remember. To push her, to calm her down psychologically, but then the dance was so intense to push her physically, because I was interested in that breaking point when she has to reveal her vulnerability. She has no choice.
So collaboration is one way to bridge some of these boundaries. So thinking about multiracial works, what do those actually look like? What are some examples of that? This is an early one. I'm dating myself, but this is a Rodgers and Hammerstein Disney Cinderella. We have a black Cinderella, a black fairy godmother, both a black and a white stepsister, an Asian prince. And this really looks more like who our society is. But you'll notice that it's not really Europe, it's this fantasy place, right? We seem to be more comfortable with bringing diversity into European stories, I think because of assimilation and the historic expectation that people of color adopt European culture, whereas it might be weirder to, say, do a multiracial version of Mulan, for example, right? Also, just as legendary as a story like Cinderella. But this is an example of how you could take a traditional fairy tale and make it look more multiracial. Hamilton, another great example of that. In this case, color-conscious casting, deciding that these white male figures in our history that we also have sort of built up to be larger than life, what would happen if we cast men of color in these roles? What new nuances about these men can we see when they're portrayed by men of color? But also what universal truths about these people, about these figures remain? And that's what the brilliance and the tension of Hamilton is. Another story is Rent. This is basically Puccini's La Boheme, but rock and roll. Instead of artists in Paris, they're now artists on the Lower East Side. It's much more representative of who we are today and much more relevant to us. And again, it's queer, there's a trans character, it's multiracial, it's bigger. And all of us can see a little part of ourselves in a story like Rent. And then, of course, there's a new opera that premiered at the Metropolitan Opera this season, Fire Shot in My Bones. It was the first time the Metropolitan Opera has premiered a piece by a black composer. So again, also another opportunity to say this art form is not just seeing the world through a European lens. Because let's face it, even in America, we're not Europeans either, right? White people in America, we are not Europeans. We are Americans too. So we have to move away from Europe if we want to keep this work relevant, urgent, radical, surviving. So I wanted to show you a part of this process I do in practice. What else could it be? So I'm going to show two clips from Balanchine's Nutcracker. The first one is from the 50s, I believe 1956. It's a CBS broadcast, and this is the Chinese dance from Balanchine's Nutcracker. So we're going to show both the version from the 50s and also what Pacific Northwest Ballet did this past year. So this is 1956, George Balanchine's Chinese variation from the Nutcracker. Yikes, right? My co-founder, Gina, she used to dance that part, and she couldn't really do it with integrity, so she almost tried to make a caricature of the caricature. One time she bobbed her head so hard her wig fell off on stage. So Peter Bowl, the artistic director of Pacific Northwest Ballet, called me a couple years ago and said, hey, it doesn't feel like enough to just take away the Yellowface makeup. How can I make this truly a celebration of Chinese culture? And he came up with this idea to have a cricket instead. A cricket is a symbol of spring, so for this young woman's journey into womanhood, it's a great symbol for her. Crickets are the most musical of animals, just like Balanchine dancers are the most musical of dancers. And it fits with the choreography. It lives in a box, and it comes out of the box, and it does a bunch of jumps, and it goes back in the box. Crickets are just a lucky, positive symbol from Chinese culture. And so Peter said, hey, what if it's a cricket? Now, I will say, probably the only reason Peter felt comfortable suggesting this was because of the dynamic of the conversation we set up. So if I had said to him, hey, Peter, your Nutcracker's racist, you're racist. He'd probably say to me, well, no, I'm not. My cousin's black. I lived in Japan for 5 years, and I love Mexican food. I'm not racist. Right? End of discussion. Nothing constructive can happen in that space. He's defensive. He's not listening. Whereas if I had said, hey Peter, the Chinese dance and the Nutcracker, it just feels like it's very caricatured. It's the butt of the joke a lot. Was that your intention as the artist? And if he was a choreographer with integrity, he'd say, oh, actually that's not what I was hoping that you as the audience was walking away from. I thought you would be impressed by the big jumps. But if that's your takeaway, what can we do so that that's not what you're getting, so we can focus on the jumps again, right? That's why the subtitle of my book is called Dancing Between Intention and Impact, because that really has been the philosophy to our advocacy in order to get this conversation rolling. So this is 2021. This is Pacific Northwest Ballet doing the exact same dance we just saw. Same music, same choreography, but with the green tea cricket. Now, if you were a young Asian American dancer in the audience, would you rather dance the green tea cricket or the chink in the box? That's a slur, my word. But really, this is what this work is. It's saying, let's not cancel the Nutcracker. Let's not say it's an inherently colonialist, white, straight male perspective work of art. Let's cancel it. Let's have an Asian choreographer make a new Christmas ballet. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, let's make a better Nutcracker. Let's make something that's more inclusive, and let's use that money. Nutcracker makes up to 60% of a company's annual budget. Let's use that Nutcracker money and commission a new work by an Asian choreographer or a black choreographer, in addition to Nutcracker, right? It's the opposite of cancel culture, and it's so important. And it's also what artists have been doing since the dawn of time. That's how we keep the art form alive, how we continue to innovate. So how does this work in practice? So this is a ballet, the Ballet of Porcelain, which I premiered at the Met this past December. The ballet's from 1739, and basically when Europe discovered the secret of making Chinese porcelain, they created this ballet about a Chinese sorcerer who lives on a blue island of porcelain and turns trespassers into porcelain. My collaborator is a professor at NYU, and she found this ballet in the archives in Paris. There was the libretto and the music, but no choreographic notation. And she came to me and she said, this would be highly problematic if we staged it the way it was, but it's also a work that is highly influential in terms of defining Chineseness as performed on stage. So it's an interesting work, and I couldn't resist trying to untangle that. So in our version, which just premiered, we coded the magician as a Western sorcerer. He was modeled after Augustus the Strong, the king of Poland, who self-proclaimed had a porcelain sickness and literally traded a platoon of his army for these 2 porcelain vases. So the type of person who really collects people and things, and there's a blurred line between object and people. And then our prince and princess were portrayed by 2 Asian American soloists of the New York City Ballet. I worked with an all Asian American creative team to do new costumes, add a little bit of new music, and suddenly this work, which was originally an allegory about triumphing over Asia, suddenly becomes a piece about saying, hey, look at us Asian Americans with nuance. Look at us as real people. We're not dolls. We're not a disease. We have dreams. We fall in love. We're real people. Please see us with real people. Let's break that spell. So again, taking a ballet from 1739 and turning it on its head to be still what it is. It still follows the libretto. It's still the same music, but means something very different today. I'm also finishing up a year-long process with the Boston Lyric Opera called the Butterfly Process, where we hosted a year-long series of discussions around Madame Butterfly. BLO realized at the height of the pandemic that they weren't in a place where they could responsibly stage Madame Butterfly, and so instead canceled their production and dedicated resources to really unpacking some of the dynamics in this opera. So it's a 6-part discussion series, it's a whole lot of resources, and it's leading up to a production that I'll be directing for them next September. So really with this spirit of trying to keep this work alive, but do it in a way that is for a multiracial audience, which includes Asian people. I'm also working on a ballet project which will premiere in 2024. It's a full-length staging of La Bayadère, which is the commercial we saw from Houston Ballet. And I'm setting it during the 1920s, during the golden age of Hollywood movie musicals. So instead of it being about Indians, it's actually going to be a cowboy country western picture, like a Busby Berkeley film. So I wanted to show you a clip from La Bayadère just to illustrate and give you an idea of this game of what else could it be, which I often ask. So this is a dance called the Dance of the Indians. It's a very unique dance because you can see a lot of the rules being broken, right? Orientalism. You see asymmetry, you see different rhythmic patterns, you see different groupings of people than you would a classical ballet. It almost looks like a modern dance. But this is actually what it looked like. It's very well notated, it was notated often, and so we know this is actually what it looked like from that time. So we're gonna watch a clip of this Dance of the Indians. Trigger warning, they are in blackface. This is the Mariinsky from 2014. And in our version, it's they're all going to be wearing fringe. It's dancing cowboys, you know? So just sort of blur your eyes a little bit and just try to see beyond the blackface and the problematic portrayals of Indian people and just see the body and see the music. It's really fun. It's actually like one of the most fun dances. But I'm asking you to look beyond the racism, look beyond that, and see something that, what else could it be? So this is the Dance of the Indians from La Bayadère. This is 1870, by the way. This is before modern dance even started. That makeup's pretty bad. Oops, he dropped his drum. I've never seen an Indian woman wear a bikini, a traditional Indian woman wear a bikini, but here we are. All right, so wanted to share one last thing, which is sort of the next phase of what we're doing. So alongside a few other Asian American leaders in the dance field, we just launched the Gold Standard Arts Foundation actually this May. This came out of us looking at the fact that a lot of American companies were no longer doing Yellowface, but still not hiring Asian American artists to tell our own stories in our own words. So we do ballets like La Bayadere every year, but we don't hire Asian choreographers. So just a few examples. The current artistic director of American Ballet Theater, our national company of America, he's been there for 30 years, and he has hired 0 Asian choreographers during his tenure. Yet he's done La Bayadere every year since he's been there, every other year. San Francisco Ballet, New York City Ballet, also 2 big dance companies, have each only hired 1 Asian choreographer, Edward Liang, one of our board members. So this one token Asian choreographer, since their company's inception. 1. Yet we do these exotic fantasy every season, right? So pushing back against that, we have been working with about 10 American ballet companies to commission new Asian American choreographers by 2025. We've already matched 5 choreographers with 5 companies, and I'm pleased to say that 4 of them are women, so we're also bridging the gender gap with our work. The Gold Standard Arts Foundation is also serving as a network community hub for the Asian American ballet community. After the shooting in Atlanta, everybody turned to Gina and myself, and they were like, what do we do? What's the action? We want to help. And we're like, what do you mean? We're 2 people on a website. We're not all Asian people. But we realized that, oh, we are the Asian people in the room, that we did not, as a community, build a meaningful space for ourselves. So while there's Alvin Ailey or Dance Theater of Harlem or Ballet Hispanico, there really isn't an Asian American space for us. So this is really why we are trying to build this organization and be a place for professional development, for networking, and for advocacy, to keep pushing the spaces that we are in to be more equitable. So the flip side of the Yellowface coin is actually supporting Asian American artists. So yeah, that's sort of where our current work is at the moment. I'm really excited to be coming back to Carleton in the fall. I'll be teaching a dance history course, which is through the lens of Orientalism, and is really going to not only give you guys a sense of history, but also those practical skills of how do we think in a multiracial, multicultural way? How do we shift into a bigger way of thinking? So if you guys are interested, please sign up. But happy to take any questions you guys have while we're here. So thank you for coming.
And thank you very much, Phil. Did you want to say a word about your book? Or
Yeah, sure. I wrote a book. I'm working on my second one. But if you are interested in this work, it's available in the Carleton bookstore. And happy to sign it if you come find me. I'll be around for the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Phil. And I'd also want to mention a couple more things. First off, thank you. Secondly, I'm sorry. I learned a valuable lesson today. Wait until the presenter is in the room before you start the introduction. So sorry about that. Poor Phil heard him being introduced, himself being introduced, and had to come charging in. So sorry about that. And one other thing, we still have a few seats at the luncheon today. So if anyone's interested, please come up and talk to me after the convocation ends. So with that, Phil mentioned questions and answers. If you have questions, I'd love to bring you a mic.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. My name is Aska Sangal. I'm the Director of Asian Studies. It was so exciting for me when the Theater and Dance Department approached me earlier to tell me about your class and asked me to count your class toward Asian Studies. And of course I said yes. So we're very excited to have you back next term. I'm wondering if you could tell us more about your experience growing up, choosing ballet. And I just keep wondering, why ballet? I grew up in Japan practicing ballet myself, and I asked that question many, many times, like, why ballet? There's so many different dance forms out there. Like, why did you choose ballet? And did you ever question that decision?
Yeah, so I started when I was about 6. My mom was flying back, so I grew up in Hong Kong. My mom is white, my dad is Chinese, and so she was flying back from Ohio, where our family lives, and she was stuck overnight in Tokyo on a layover, and the person sitting next to her on her flight was a dancer with the Hong Kong Ballet, a flamboyant man who called himself Miss Singapore. And so they became fast friends, and so growing up, she would take me to the ballet, and I was one of those kids with a lot of energy, bouncing around, and so driving my mother crazy, and Miss Singapore said, just put him in dance class. I think I stopped around middle school just because it's hard being a boy in ballet, but picked it up again in high school and here at Carleton. But I think for me, what was the most important thing, why ballet? I think I was coming to ballet at a time when there was a lot going on in my family life, and dance was a way for me to feel strong and in control of my body and in control, and also have a vocabulary to express feelings that I didn't quite have the words or the emotional maturity to express, but I could through dance. And I think it has given me incredible discipline and strength of character and drive, and I'm passionate about sharing this because I think everybody can have that experience too. So I love getting new people to dance because I think that it has that potential to heal, to strengthen. Ballet specifically, I think I'm just I like the punishment. It's a really strict discipline. It's really hard, and but also I think it's probably the most freeing experience I have ever come to. It's the closest thing to flying, not on an airplane, which I think I'll ever experience in my life. I just can't explain it. It's like, as Victoria Page in The Red Shoe says, you ask me why I dance, I ask you why you live, But yeah, I mean, I guess the message there is like, for whatever you're interested in, if not dance, find whatever that is that gets you to feel like that and just keep moving in that direction. It could be science, it could be math, it could be, social work, whatever it is. But I think what's nice is Carleton is one of those places that can help you figure that out.
Completely going off that question, actually, what would you say would be your turning point to also become an advocate for social change?
I don't think I had a choice. I think it chose me, leaving Peter Martin's office and just saying, wow, here is one of the top gatekeepers, one of the most influential people willing to change. And if they're willing to change, why not everybody else? And I just felt, me and my co-founder, we both felt like we were at the right place at the right time to make that change. And so when you see that, like, do you choose to step up, or do you not? And I don't know, we just felt like we could really make a big difference. We couldn't change the world. This is not like we're not ending all racism everywhere. We were saying, what's one little thing in our little corner of the world, something super specific that we can make change about? One little thing. And it's rippled into something much bigger, but it really has just been, we're not trying to end racism in ballet. We're not trying to end racism in dance. We're specifically saying, fix Asian representation. And then now people are saying, oh, that applies to Black people. That applies to Native American portrayals. That applies to, it's had this beautiful ripple effect, but I think it's only worked because we've been laser focused on something very specific that is tied to our own personal experiences. So to answer your question, I didn't set out to do this. I've probably done at least 10,000 hours of unpaid labor to do this work, in addition to my day job and whatever. But like if asked to lead and you see an opportunity to make a difference, step up.
Thank you.
No more questions. I can also give my green curry recipe too, if you guys want. Betsy's hungry.
Yes. Oh, hi, Phil.
Hi, Rika.
I was realizing as you were talking that you weren't eliminating all portrayals of Asians in dance. Like in the dance from the Pacific Northwest, there were still 2 women dressed in, I think, generalized Asian wear, and that we got rid of the sort of caricature, turning it into a cricket. So I'm wondering, where do you draw the line, and how do you think about, this portrayal of Asians in this way is okay and this way isn't? I mean, what kinds of conversations have you had around that?
Yeah, so change is slow. The Balanchine Trust, which controls the rights to the Nutcracker, it has taken us 4 years to convince them to let us change one costume. Okay, so like the 2 women, they're based, those headdresses, they are based on actual Chinese headdresses, but they read a little Minnie Mouse to me. So even though they're historically accurate, the impact on an audience might not be what we think it is. I know that PNB is planning on changing the ladies too, but literally the change just takes that much time to do it, and there's a lot of conservative forces. And when I say conservative, I don't mean, they're trying to, ban abortions, but, conservative meaning try to keep it as historically accurate as possible. That's not a real thing in the performing arts anyway, because it's always changing. But there's that impetus, that desire of saying, well, this great artist made it that way, so we can't change it, even though that's the whole point of the performing arts. If you don't like change, go be a photographer, go be a filmmaker, go be a sculptor, right? Those things don't change. But both the blessing and the curse of working in the performing arts is no 2 shows are the same. And it's always going to keep changing, depending on who we are as a society and as an audience. So it's helping companies have those conversations, realizing that change is slow and working at their speed to make some of those changes. But yeah, I mean, just to really understand, that's 4 years just to let them change one costume to not be racist. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
One more question.
Hi, Phil. I guess I'm wondering, as you talk about having these conversations that happen very slowly over time, and I imagine are sometimes frustrating and are personal, how do you comport yourself? How do you bring yourself to those conversations where you're kind of trying to, like you said, not put a director on edge or become defensive, but to really engage in the conversation? What work are you doing inside yourself to get ready for that conversation?
I take a lot of bubble baths. No, like that's a real answer. This work is really exhausting. I pace myself. I realize that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I practice inclusive advocacy, which means you put yourself in with the problem. So instead of saying, hey, you need to fix your ballet, I say, how can we fix our ballet so that we get the result that we both want, right? Even though it sometimes feels like we're standing on opposite sides of an argument, just by me putting myself in with them and saying, we have the shared goal of wanting ballet to survive. So how do we make sure that Asian families feel comfortable in our school? How do we make sure that black folks aren't leaving our theaters halfway through the ballet because there's blackface on stage and they realize that this is not what they signed up for? How do we get more board members of color to give money and be a part of this organization? So when you put yourself inside the problem that you're trying to fix with the people who are in control, that's when you can actually have power and say, let's do something together. And I think that's also been a big, crucial part of our advocacy, is we're not outsiders, having to get angry and go on social media. It's like, oh, I can just call the director of ABT because I know him, or and it's just one person, and we can have this conversation quietly. It doesn't need to be public. I don't need to shame anybody, even though my Chinese heritage is saying, shame him, I try not to do that, but.
And on that note, we actually need to conclude the convocation. Thank you once again, Phil, and thank you for being here.